Let's start again. Click on this calculator or go to gufinance.com. You see under risk and return stock calculation, but the last one, non-constant growth calculator, this is the one we're using for these questions. So for this calculator, what you can do is dividend at year 0. This is D0. For example, it's $1. For example, year 1, the growth rate, for example, it's 30%, very fast. Second year's dividend growth rate, for example, slow down a little bit, 20%. For example, since year 3, and the firm has been operating very normally, and its growth rate is stabilized at 6%. And year 4 is also 6%, and so on. So we can just don't need to figure out. We can just don't need the information for dividend from year 3 anymore, because since after year 3, dividend is going to be 6% every year. So we can use dividend growth model in this case. So what we should do is we should figure out the dividend in year 1, which is $1 increase by 30%. Year 2 would be from year 1's dividend increase another 20%. For year 3's dividend, we can use D2, year 2's dividend increase by 6%, that's D3. And also, since we are going to be getting the dividend with constant growth since year 3, so we can just apply the dividend growth model. Just assume this is like our dividend growth model. This is like the growth rate for dividend, and so since stock price starts to growing at a constant rate since year 3, it's just like when we're using P0 equals to D1 over R minus G. So the year 3's dividend is just like D1 in the dividend growth model. Then the year 2's stock price is like P0 in our calculation, in our dividend growth model. So we can just calculate D3 dividend in year 3 and use that number divided by R minus G. G is 6%. Let's say stock return, for example, let's assume it's 10%. So if you use D3 over R minus G, that will give us P2. And then once you got the P2, you can use the NPV function. The first cash flow should be D1, D2 plus P2. And discount rate is 10%. And if we use the NPV function of that one, we can figure out the stock prices. But if you use this calculator, you don't need the information. You don't need to use NPV. It will just calculate it for you. 36.64. But let's use Excel to demonstrate this. So it's $1, 30%, 20%, 6%, and 10% of stock return. Let's do that. Okay. So let's see. The information given is D0 is 1. So this is a current dividend. And we also know G, let's say put as G1. G growth rate of year 1 is 30%. Growth rate of the second year is 20%. But G3 and the future G, and the futures G is 6%, and R is 10%. So now let's try to use this information and calculate. The question is asking for how much is this stock price. So this is the question. Okay, so for this question, so we need to know how much is let's say year cash flow. We need to know D1. We also need to know D2. And this is year 1, this is year 2. So, and since dividend start to grow at 6%, so we can, since year 3, it's going to be at 6%. So we can figure out these 3. And we use these 3 to get P3, to get P2. Usually, you see, this is what we should do. Okay, so we use D3 to get P2. It seems confusing. It's you might be confused, but however, since dividend is growing at 6%, so and stays constant, growth rate stays constant, so we can figure out P2, not P3, because if we try to get the P3, we need D4 to get the P3, but dividend grows constantly since year 3. So this is just like our dividend growth model's D1 here. So that's why we use D3 to get P2. So the cash flows we need to get the answer for this question, we need D2 and P2. And to get the P2 should be, based on dividend growth model, should be D3 over R minus G. Once we got this, so the question is asking for how much is P0 here. So to get the P0, how much is P0? So P0 should be, we can use this NPV function because our cash flows are known, 10%, and D1, D2 plus P2. And this should be the answer for this question. Since we used the calculator, we got the answer already. But let's see, is that right? 10%. D1 is $1 increase by 30%. And the D2 is from D1, so it's increased by another by another 20%. So this is D2. You see, so now we got D2, but we also have to add P2. P2 equals to D3. How much is D3? D3, this is D2. D3 equals to D2 I shouldn't make it so long, but anyhow, let's see. 1 plus 6%. This is D3. And D3 over R minus G. R is 10%. G is 6%. Oh. Okay. Okay. 10 minus 6. No. 6%. Let's see. 36.64. 36.64. It's correct. So you can find the equation over here. So you see, this is a stock price in general's equation. It's because I put n year there. But if it's 3 years, so you have if it's 3 years, so this one, we need this one. We also need this one. And then, but anyhow, this is a general equation here. Okay. So it just in other words, let's say you can use NPV once you know the cash flows of dividend in year 1 and year 2, and also the price, you know, you can figure out by the end of year 2. So your cash flows will be D1, D2 plus P2. After year 2, you sold the stock at P2, so you don't have any cash flow anymore for the stock. Okay, so let's let me just show you. D1 is how much? D1 should equal to 1 times 1 plus 30%. Let me show you. This is D1. How much is D2? D2 should be 1.3 increased by 20%. This is D2. How much is P2? P2 should be D3, which is D2 multiplied by 1 plus 6% over R minus G, 10% minus 6%. So you see, these are what we should be using in the NPV function. So if we use the NPV function with the actual numbers, so it should be 10%, 1.3, 1.56 plus 41.34, and that's the same answer. You see, so this is the input with the actual numbers. This is the input with the whole equations. Okay, so you got it. The general idea is just like since the dividend growth rate are different, so what you can do is put down the dividend at year 0 and the growth rate year by year, and then stop when dividend start to grow at the constant rate, and then click and put down the required return and click the calculate, and it will give you the price. If the dividend growth rate are not given, but for this calculator we need growth rate, so you can use the actual dividend given, like for example D1 is a number given and D0 is another number, you know, so you can use D1 over D0 minus 1 to get G1. This is the general concept. Let's now go back to the real questions and give it a try.